You have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz. Excited to have on Chris Kenny, who's the managing partner at Level 5 Capital. Chris, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. Appreciate it.
So take me through the different levels that you've evolved through your career in franchising, because I think it's pretty cool how you've gone from being a franchisee to now an aggregator of brands through a private equity fund.
Yeah. So we started this business as kind of a side hustle, a long time ago, back in the late 2000s. A lot of people have, friends at work that they talk about starting a business with, and we actually went and did it. We were customers of a business called Core Power Yoga in the early 2000s. The quick funny story there is I started doing Core Power Yoga on the advice of my friend Charles Myers, because I tore my meniscus in my knee walking back up to my skis on a powder day. So not even like, wiping out on the skis. And, you just kind of learned at that point, the world was going to start to move towards functional movements as opposed to static movements and, treadmills and things like that. And so, this business was just starting to take off with 2 stores, and ultimately, they got up to 20 stores, and we helped them raise a private round. But part of the deal is that we got to become their anchor franchisee in 2 markets when they hadn't really franchised before. So they hadn't franchised, we hadn't franchised, and we kind of muddled our way through it together. And the good news is a powerful unit model is going to get you through a lot of things, and that was the case at Core Power. In 2013, we worked to potentially acquire the business from the founder with a private equity partner. We ended up losing out to L. Catterton. And when that occurred, we kept growing our yoga business as a franchisee, but we went out in search of a brand that we could grow either as a company-owned store platform or ultimately as a franchisor or franchisee model. And our model these days is we invest in a collection of brands. And more often than not, we also become an anchor franchisee because there's plenty of great white space. And as we like to say, we do like to eat our own dog food along the way, because there's just some markets that we love owning the street corner in, so to speak. But it also just gives us a really good view of the things a brand needs to be good at, but then also the help that it needs to give the four-wall or franchisee operators. And vice versa, because the franchisee can say, I need this to be more profitable and it will make your system grow faster. This is the number one thing I need. And that feedback can loop through and actually prioritize appropriately, with us being on the board at the franchisor and the brand and knowing what can power the growth of the enterprise.
Also, just from like a non-financial perspective, like just your level of empathy is much higher because you're living it day to day.
Yeah, I mean, there's people who don't realize that franchise business is 24/7, right? I mean, you're for consumer business, you're operating out of not 9 to 5 typically, right? And you've got to, like Henry Ford said, you've got a human operating whatever piece of it. Humans get happy, sad, divorced, all these different things, and there's a lot of human management that has to occur. And then on the flip side, and that's the franchisee, and on the flip side, the brand has a lot of scaled things it needs to bring to make those synergies, maximize.
So you've probably have looked at like hundreds of franchise business models or even licensed business models. What kind of unit economics do you look for, whether it's like in terms of EBITDA percentage or kind of a payback period, return on your cash?
Yeah, I mean, generally we've framed the world into 2 buckets. One is, mature industries with like a new take on that industry. So our Big Blue Swim School investment is in line with that. Our Go Dog investment is in line with that. And so those are, investments where we'll look for a brand that has 2 to 10 doors open, that we can build up all of the infrastructure that's required to scale massively. And there's great returns for our investors there. But we're on the unit level, we're looking at 48-month or lower return profile because they tend to be less risky, right? They're in mature industries and they're taking a new approach to it. And then there are businesses that are new and they're growing rapidly. We need to see 10 to 30 doors in there. They may have more of like a fad risk potential there. You don't know that it's going to be a consumer staple for 50 years, but it's also not jazzercise, right? I mean, we're not looking for things that are just going to be around for a couple of years, right? And so in those instances, we're looking for payback periods of sub 30 months and, quite often better than that.
Yeah, I like those metrics because like the reality is you could buy an existing business. You should definitely, unless you totally screw it up, get your money back within 5 years. So
Yeah.
If it's going to be more than 48 months, it's like, okay, maybe just do an existing business and not even do the franchise model or do like a franchise resale.
Well, and importantly, on what I was saying there too, those are unlevered returns. There's no debt on there, right? So when you get some level of scale and can put some debt on the businesses, your returns can go down from there pretty dramatically. And that but we always want to have like one lens of like this is an equity return, right? So
Yeah, it's dumbing it down so it's easier to compare apples to apples.
absolutely.
And then, I mean, I imagine for a lot of these businesses, like maybe the resale value would be like three, four times what the owner makes today. But as the brand becomes more established, like it could trade at a nice premium at EBITDA, like a Dunkin' Donut at like 6 or 7x EBITDA.
Yeah, exactly. We find that it really comes down to remaining growth in the business and how much white space you have left and how consistent the unit model is to get those kinds of outcomes. If there's no growth in the business and it's just a cash flowing enterprise, 3 to 4 times. At Dunkin', the thing is there's still tons of white space in that business, which is why it gets those multiples. So for as many Dunkins as there are out there, there's plenty to build.
Yeah, and a lot of the franchisees, they've opened up already, 10 to 20, and they have development rights for another 10, 20, 30, or whatever. So I guess the PE funds largely coming in, and valuing it at a nice amount because there's that growth space.
Exactly.
So you invest across pretty different like consumer verticals. Is there one that was like kind of more surprising when you like started digging in before investing in the business, where you're like, oh wow, like this has amazing tailwinds. Like I'm gonna explore this concept, but also a bunch of other ones before investing in this franchise.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're in the kids enrichment space, right? So that's like a bucket. We're in fitness, right, which is a big bucket. We've entered pets, right, another bucket. We've got beauty. You've got recovery and wellness, like category, which is still kind of like fragmenting and building these little big industries. They start little and then they get really big with the macro tailwinds. And then we've got beauty, right? And then lastly, home services with our 2U laundry business. So those are like the categories we've kind of gotten thus far into. We don't have an expertise on the investment side in restaurants, so we've stayed out of that space to date. But that would be another massive space. But when you've got those kinds of buckets and you can see where the consumer is headed with their wallet, you kind of just want to stay ahead of those trends and talking with a lot of founders about what they're seeing in the marketplace and what demand they're getting, and does what they say match up with what actually occurred.
And Chris, talking to you a little bit before we hit record, it seems like you enter in the capital stack with some of these franchise brands earlier than many of the other private equity players in the space, where they might have a mandate where it has to be, the large funds over 20 million EBITDA, some of the smaller funds over 3 million EBITDA. And it seems like you can play, you're a little more flexible and you can get in early and really shape the brand with the founder.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we look at. Many times the businesses are right around break even when we invest, and we take them slightly more negative to grow more quickly and make the right
Yeah.
infrastructure investments on the front end to grow them. But that's not typical of private equity because we're working with the founders to build out the management team and we're putting in place all of the initial infrastructure. And so there's a bit more risk there, but for us, that's what we do. That's what our conveyor belt and our game plans and our playbooks are designed to do. So as I mentioned, before we started, having done it on 7 brands now, you've got a modus operandi of how you approach doing these.
And how, stupid question, like, where's the distinction, like, between like VC, like venture capital, and the PE model that you're
Yeah,
playing
it
in this
really
year
comes down
space?
to the VC. You're trying typically to find the idea and get product market fit, right? And then there's
Pre
growth
product
and
market fit.
there's growth and buyout equity. We consider ourselves early growth, so the idea is figured out. It may not be like codified in manuals and systems yet, but the store and the 4 walls and the route are all figured out, and that's where we come in and take it from the idea and then kind of repeatable. So it's almost like the printing press, right? We're building the printing press for each of these businesses so we can make a lot of them.
That makes sense. Yeah. From studying franchises, I mean, getting that like product market fit where it is actually a viable business model that you can go out and get new franchisees, licensees could take like 1 to 20 years before you really have like a model that you can replicate that doesn't just rely on you as the owner and being super actively involved.
Right. And that's what we're trying to accelerate ultimately.
I mean, I guess I connect with a lot of the brands that you're in. Before now having two kids, I used to do a lot more yoga with my wife, like at least three
Same
three days a
here.
week. Miami Beach, we were talking a little bit. Like, there's so many fitness studios, yoga. People are very into fitness in Miami, and obviously the pet space of the dog. But more recent one is swim lessons. I love swimming. My daughter is turning 2. It's such a great joy. I see all around
Well,
it's
there's
amazing
freedom and
for the childhood
independence for the
development.
kids, right? With the swimming, right? And there's just, I mean, well, the founder of Big Blue, Christy Young, always says to me, nobody's ever felt worse getting out of the water. Like it's you like
Exactly.
get in and it resets you, right? If clearly we're not talking about necessarily jumping in into the Arctic plunge or something like that, but there's a reason why we spend most of our summers around pools and bodies of water, right?
Yeah, no, I live in the water. I love surfing, kite surfing, swimming. So for
Yeah.
me, just having that ability to share that passion with, my children at a much earlier stage. And I guess what's like historically for our parents' generation was conventional, where I was on floaties till I think probably like 5 years old. And if I
Yeah.
didn't have those floaties, I would have drowned in the pool.
Exactly. And now you've got kids, swimming hundreds of yards at that age.
For the Big Blue Swim School, there's a lot of different franchises in that space. Some are one-on-one courses where they send the instructor to the parent's house or a pool. Other ones they use like a pool at a Marriott or Hilton. Tell me a little bit about the Big Blue Swim School and how the model is differentiated and what led you to invest in it.
Yeah, maybe I'll start there. My older brother has 6 kids, 10 and under. And when he had his first kid, he got experienced the swim space and he went to a competitor of ours called Goldfish Swim School. But it was only when they had, a handful of units open. And, he just said, hey, this is a great concept, but it's not organized at all. They're using like triplicate carbon copy forms and things like that. And it's just chaos in the pool, but the kids have fun. The water's warm, all these different things. If you guys could professionalize it like you've done with the Core Power team, you could really turn this into something. And so that, I eventually took my niece to a swim lesson. I got to experience it. I saw the chaos, right? And we then, kind of, looked around in the industry, kissed a lot of frogs, and ultimately found Big Blue, which, we kind of at the time had said this is kind of dedicated swim schools 2.0. And what I mean by dedicated swim schools is they're not in a hotel pool. They're not in a 24-hour fitness because those pools are for lap swimming, typically 79
Yeah.
degrees. Kids have no body fat, right? Or shouldn't. And so 90-degree air, 90-degree water. And we know thermodynamics says that I can't have, 90 degrees and then a couple hours later it's going to be 79. It's got to be purpose built. Well, the reality is that we finally built enough water one day. And what I mean by that is we built a pool that could hold a certain amount of kids such that we hit kind of the sweet spot for parents of quality and convenience. So you could get any age kid 10 and under and their sibling or however many siblings there are in the same half hour cycle to get a swim
Great.
lesson, right? Because they're all at different
Yeah.
skill levels. And so now you've got mom or dad, one parent can handle all the kids, and then you can just pop them in their PJs and throw them in bed if it's a weeknight, or you can just go right on to your next activity if it's a weekend. So you've built this convenience and quality into their lives that just can't be replicated, right? And their kids are learning faster because the water's warm, and kids need warm water in order to keep their attention span high and not teeth chattering, right? And so it really is just kind of a 2.0 facility where I view these as really like the local power company of swim lessons, right? So if you think about kid infrastructure in the US, it's actually pretty well established. Like we've known where the best schools were. And oh, by the way, that's where the highest property taxes are. And as soon as your kids aren't going to school there, quite often you move out because you don't need to pay that high property tax burden for not the value of it, right? So you just go and look at where all the best schools are, and you start to plop, swim schools everywhere, and you've got effectively a utility.
And it doesn't seem like you compete with public sources like a rec center just because the temperatures are way off and the experience is going to be so different.
Temperature, and also, from franchising, right, we're applying a very disciplined approach to teaching these lessons. Big Blue hit 40,000 lessons a week last week. And we own
Wow.
our own software, the whole ERP system. So for 12 years, we've been watching thousands of kids swim per week, like, as ones and zeros, right? And we've been tracking that data to the point where we can now tell, your soon to be 3-year-old daughter, we can tell the parent, if your daughter attends 7 of the next 10 lessons, she will get the skill based on our body of data, right? But attendance is key, right? You can't just pay the bill, right? And so for us, we're just evolving it. Software is continuing to eat the world, and we think franchising and consumer services are benefiting from that now.
Any idea what like the lifetime value of a customer or a family is for
Yeah,
because I
for a
imagine like you get
customer,
like
believe it
what
or not,
2.2 customers because like you have two or three sibling or you have a sibling or two.
yeah, the average family has 1.7 kids 3 years apart, right? So if you can do the math, it's about um, you know 27 months to forget how hard it was for the first 12, right? And of their existence, right? So for the lifetime value of a family, it's well north of $3,000. A kid is 1,900 if you get them early, right? If you catch them at 2 or 3 years old, right? So we do know all those things about the kids, but at the end of the day, we're seeing the kids swim so much farther, so much more safely than they ever have in the past. That Big Blue and just the industry's stamp on the world is likely to be that we'll move unintentional drowning out of the number one cause of death for kids 5 and under at some point here.
Yeah, it's a huge mission, and I'm sure a lot of franchisees can get on board with that. And it seems like the U.S. and some other countries like Israel are leading the charge. But right now, I'm in France, and kids, people are astonished when my daughter is swimming like 3 yards because they don't do that. They have the
Yeah.
floaties, and they really wait much longer to introduce their kids to swimming here.
We get a lot of sideways looks from people. Hey, I just got thrown in the pool by my parents. Why do I need to pay X to get a lesson every week? And you go and you see it and you're like, wow, how did we survive?
Yeah, it gives the parent so much more confidence, especially in these states where like every weekend in Florida, we are by the pool, we are by the ocean. So if the family is like $3,000, I imagine franchisees open up in a territory, they're gonna have to pay a good amount to acquire that $3,000 family. But when does like the referral train start really coming in, where it's just like getting a nice flow of referrals from past
Well, we were
families?
talking about this a little bit before we got going, but one of the things that L5 partners with our portfolio companies on is their marketing strategy and their marketing tactics. Believe it or not, like we're averaging about $30 to acquire that customer. The CAC
30, so
LTV,
1%.
yeah, CAC LTV is
That's
pretty
awesome.
insane. Yeah. Now,
Yeah, and you
now
have like the most sophisticated like companies like having 10% and that being really good, and a lot of franchisees I talk to it's like way higher, like 30-40%.
Yeah. So for us, that's the number one thing we do is try and bring a scaled advantage to those businesses. In that way, I call it the oxygen of the businesses, and the more oxygen you can bring early on, the better, and the faster the system is going to grow, the faster the franchisee is going to build store 2 and 3.
And how does that vary across industries? Like for level four or for heyday, like are some industries where it's not 1% and you're still
Yeah, I
operating
mean,
in
Big
like a
Blue
nice
is really
percentage, but it's
good,
not.
but I think when you it's like the 5 minute mile and then the 4 minute mile, right? Once you know you can do it, you just try and tune every business to that, right? I think what's so interesting about marketing these days, and not all marketing, right? But just the areas we focus on, but Facebook and Google are going to tell you the customer does or does not like what you're putting in front of them, right? So Facebook as a business does not want to let you put trash that the customer says, nah, turning off my phone, right? They're going to charge you
Get
a
some off the
lot to get that
platform for the
message
day.
out there, right? And so when you get a bad signal of like, hey, your CAC is $400, you've got the wrong slogan, you've got the wrong this, you've got the wrong that. You've just got to go back to work. And it's not going to be one thing. I always say you got to try 10 things to figure out two things that you get a really good signal on, one really bad and one really good, and then eight in the middle do nothing. Right. So you just kind of got to get to work on it, and you can't have an ego on it. But the customer is going to tell you with their engagement.
Do you roll it out at the corporate side, like from the franchisor level, or do you test out the marketing at the franchisee level, or is it kind of a mix of both?
Well, quite often we're the largest franchisee of most of our investments,
Yeah.
and there's also typically corporate stores. So we'll be patient zero, right, on a lot of these things, and eat our own dog food. And but for us, you're looking at it, you're saying, well, what if you find one of those 10 things that's really bad? And you're like, well, no, our job is to grow the business and to try these things, right? And so for us, we always have to be kind of innovating that direction. So it's typically going to be us that tries it first. There can be franchisees that you trust to do that, and the reason why I say trust is that data collection is so key on these things, because if you want to partner with a franchisee and then they're not collecting the data in the right way, and you're believing something, right, that is actually not accurate, and then putting it out into the whole system, and all of a
The whole
sudden you've
funnel can be
actually,
screwed up.
yeah, you've taken a bad seed and then that was contained, right, and you put it everywhere, and now you're potentially missing out on 2-3 years worth of growth as a result of that, because you had a whole bunch of stores open up with unsuccessful results, right?
So, I mean, I can see on the branding side, the marketing side, how you guys give like crazy value add. Do you also help with like the sales aspect at all, or call center, or is that on the franchisee?
We push a lot of that into the businesses, and we just offer advice or share how many times we've stubbed
What
our
works for
toe,
you?
so that you're not like, I mean, I do, building franchisors is a lot like being a toddler, right? And you're just learning what hurts, right? And so we're just trying to provide that advice of, don't touch that one. Like, here's what happened when we did that, right? And here are the 3 times we tried different things on it. So lots of case studies that maybe are more stories, but we try and codify them as much as we can.
And it seems like based on the unit level economics and our discussion today and what I studied before our call, like all these brands are well suited for multi-unit operators,
Yes.
which it can't be said about most franchises being marketed, where it's largely you buy yourself a job, and
Hmm.
maybe that job is sold as a semi-absentee business opportunity, and it's not, and you wake up a year later and you're upset. But it seems like with your models, it really is. And what franchisees are you actively looking to recruit into your system?
Well, I just find that like there are a lot of people who think that there's this just like unicorn prototype franchisee out there. We have not found that to be the case. So from my perspective, you're looking at a franchise relationship lasting 2.5 times the length of any marriage, right? You're looking for good people,
Yeah.
right? And also as a franchisor, you're looking for people who want to get scale, right? And they know that they can't just like invent unique things every day, because that is the anathema of franchising, right? One of the examples I give, because we're in an Atlanta-based company, one of my friends works at Delta Airlines, and he said that the number one thing they do to figure out if a pilot will work in their system or not is they have this very specific attire for what you show up for your interview in. And if you don't show up precisely in that, you're out, right? Because they don't want anybody who's like trying to go rogue on them. It's a pilot. Like, you got to follow everything, checklist, 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 right? So we're not that precise where we're looking at what people wear, but we're definitely, we're looking at people and saying, are they likely to fight everything we do? And is this going to be a very painful role to staff to interact with this franchisee, right? Because ultimately we have humans in our franchisor, and we don't have a culture, and we want to have people working together in a happy sandbox. And many times that turns out not to be the case. So we're trying to filter, number one, for that.
And I imagine you're in a nice situation where you don't need the franchisees. You could just continue growing the corporate route, and probably financially it does make sense to bring in franchisees, but the business will be fine if you just continue growing with your own stores.
Yeah, and I guess we always have this like certain level of anxiety of scale really matters for your brand, right? And so we can only build a brand so fast on our own with our own capital. And you want to get national scale in order to crowd out other competitors from the marketplace. I mean, we'd all love to be In-N-Out Burgers where they can wait like 20 years to move from coast to coast, right? 30 years, whatever, it is, but that's not typically the case. Like if something catches fire with the consumer, it's going to attract capital and growth. And, we want to be more of the leader than the follower in that space. And franchising allows you to do that. I think the other thing is we're going to codify the business for ourselves anyway, right? And so we want to share that kind of secret sauce with, as I said before, people that are good to partner with.
And you have groups. I know you're not as much in the food space, but you have Dutch Bros, First Watch, Texas Roadhouse, where I believe they no longer franchise anymore. They built with franchisees as well as some corporate locations, and then sometime after the IPOs, they just switched and they no longer accept franchisees. Have you thought about that later on for some of your brands, or at what point does it make sense just to develop corporate locations?
Well, and again, I'll just speaking for myself. I think there's really two things. One is there so little white space remaining, and that is needed for absolute levels of growth. Number one, and then number two, when companies go public, they don't need necessarily the same growth rates as they did before, right? A company growing at 500% per annum in the public markets don't really know how to value that, and you might actually get yourself out of white space too
Stock's like
fast,
going to be like crazy.
right? And so you actually want to kind of have some more kind of predictable, sustained growth level. Though that would be my perspective on it. But like if we invested in a business, which could very well happen, that there can only be 30 of nationally, well, we're not going to franchise that business, right? It just doesn't make sense.
In terms of franchisees, they need to match your core values. They need to be nice people to work with, and that you actually enjoy, being around. How about on the financial side? Like, how much do they need in terms of liquid capital, net worth?
Yeah, it's interesting from a franchisor perspective. Let's say you had 600 territories to sell. In an ideal world, you would find 600 perfect franchisees, each developing one store, and you'd have your system built like
Yeah.
quickly, right? But the reality is you're going to kind of get lots of different shapes and sizes, and somebody who came in and did one store might come back and actually be your largest franchisee because they're the best operator and they attract capital, right? So you really don't, you can't necessarily premeditate all of this.
Sure.
Um, ultimately for us, we are looking for financially, stable people that have, for example, to build a swim school, you need close to $1 million of liquidity. At this point, just given that the pools cost about $3 million to open, so you can get SBA debt, and then you need your liquidity. But you're looking for people who are typically with that much capital, pretty seasoned in business out of the gates. So they kind of come correlated, right? Is the bottom line. But for a heyday, it costs less. For a Kid Strong, it costs even less, right? So you could be looking at needing $150,000 to open up a $600,000 unit, right? For a Kid Strong, for example.
Yeah, from what I've also heard is like talking to one franchisor, a very large system, the unit level economics have been so good, and like a lot of his franchisees are in kind of rural areas where now they're making 400, 4 or 500K a year, and they don't want to grind it. They don't want to like keep opening locations. They're happy in rural North Carolina or wherever in the U.S. How do you see that balance out? Like for the franchisees coming in, especially like Big Blue, do they come in with like their own operating team, or sometimes do they partner with someone maybe in their 20s, 30s, early 40s that's looking to really make a lot of money and work crazy hours or whatever is needed to make the business function at the highest capacity?
I would generally say there's the capital and the owner, and then there's the day-to-day store ops, right? And you do need a really good day-to-day store ops leader, but then from there, there's a wide variety of talent and compensation levels, right? But we're very clear, like you're not investing in these businesses and living year round in Turks and Caicos, never seeing your staff. Like you have to be there and be present, but you're not there you could not be there any given week, for example, and it'd be fine, right? You've got a good leader in the box, but you're not absentee, and that's something that we're just super clear on out of the gates.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It's kind of like a pet peeve of mine where business models, especially that haven't proven to be absentee or semi-absentee, are being marketed as I think it's a big disservice to like the whole franchising space.
Yeah, I think the lack of a true definition around semi-absentee is what really kind of hurts it. Like what semi-absentee meaning only 23 hours a day, right?
Well, I know there's some groups like Franchise Business Review will do surveys for select franchise systems, and like they'll report on hours. And one brand that doesn't make that much money, maybe like the average owner is making like 60 or 70K. Like their owners are working like over 60 hours a week, and I'm just like, wow, man. Like there's definitely easier paths to be making 60K in the
Yeah,
franchising space.
absolutely. You don't want to just buy yourself a job, right?
Chris, any concluding thoughts? A lot of our listeners are prospective franchisees, current franchisees, as well as franchise founders, people that are you're investing into their system or looking to invest into their system.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just always recommend people push really hard on unit economics, right? Number one, right? Really truly understand those and understand that the team you're talking to really understands them, because then you know that there's actually been scaled work put into that. And then, number two is, ensure that you're passionate about it, right? Because if you're not passionate about it, it's not going to be a fun ride regardless. You can't just do these things for financial reasons, right? Can be a big chunk of it. But you should have some level of care for what you're getting into. It doesn't have to be necessarily care for the precise business you're in, but maybe it's running the team, right? And the environment that you can be a part of and whatnot. But you've got to have something that wants to have you put your feet on the floor every morning, or it's going to get really hard one day, like we were talking about when people are just making too much money and they're like, no, this is good for me.
Yeah, I think that resonates because it's either like the end good or service that you offer you love and you're super passionate about dogs or teaching kids to swim, or it's about cultivating young talent and training up a team and then helping them mentor. That's what I tend to see it like the franchisees that have a lot of success. They see the end product, or they love cultivating a team and growing
And I love
top
it when the
talent.
franchisor takes the lead on that and helps develop some of those loyalty and recognition programs, and even seeds some level of control, right? And I'm not saying a lot, right? But to the groups that are actually doing it in the field, right? So that they're actually building in kind of like a self-reinforcing training mechanism that ultimately becomes almost like a brand fund in and of itself, another moat for the business.
Well, Chris, I learned a lot on our call today. You obviously bring a very unique perspective to franchising on the marketing side, operations side, running the brand. What's the best way for people to connect either with Level 5, whether it's, a franchise founder or with one of the individual brands? What's the best way for them to
Yeah,
reach out?
typically the easiest way is just going to be, frankly, on LinkedIn. It's like a good aggregator of all that.
Yeah.
I'm on there, just Chris Kenny L5 Capital, and that is like a good place to just log all those. Like email it just gets lost in there, whereas you can kind of go into LinkedIn and work through and triage everything and try and give people the right info and the right level of communication. But find me there, and we'll find a way to connect.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for having me, Patrick. Appreciate it.